Update, brought to you by Simcox Advocates, advising businesses and families since 1949. Visit simcox.com or call 690 300. Manx Radio's Update with Andy Wint.
Pastor Mai, good evening. It's 5:30. This is Update for Thursday, 28th of September 2023 from Manx Radio. 30 minutes to look at the latest news here on the Isle of Man. Background to that news, we've got sport, business, sea watch and travel updates and the newsmakers in person. This evening, the unions at loggerheads with the steam packet over conditions. A lack of scrutiny, says the Public Accounts Committee, reforming legal services on the Isle of Man, protecting our steam railway, and constabulary's social media post labelled unacceptable.
Man Benham for all your business and legal needs.
First of all, at 29 minutes ahead of 6 o'clock, the update news headlines. First of Mai, Chanel Suku.
First of Mai, a Sulby man who instructed children in the Philippines to carry out sexual acts for him over the internet has been jailed. John Peter Eaton was described as appalling by the Deemster, who sentenced him at Douglas Courthouse today. The Enterprise Minister says he's sorry to hear of the demise of one of the island's most iconic food producers. Tim Johnston says the closure of Moore's traditional smokehouse in Peel is regrettable, but it reflects the nature of the sector. And Nautilus has labelled the attitude of the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company as unacceptable. It follows claims that steam packet workers are being threatened with fire and rehire. In international news, a man's been arrested after a number of people were shot dead in the Dutch port city of Rotterdam. Police say a gunman who's now been detained opened fire at a medical centre and a nearby apartment earlier today. London's mayor says one death is one too many after he was accused by the Conservatives of being distracted on the issue of knife crime. A 15-year-old girl was stabbed to death on her way to school yesterday and has been described by her family as the light of their lives. And Sir Michael Gambon is being remembered as the loveliest of legends following his death aged 82. The actor died in hospital with pneumonia. Those were your headlines. News at 6.
Man Benham. Contact us by phone, video call, email or face-to-face. We're happy to connect with you. Manx Radio Weather with Manx Glass and Glazing.
Goromaya, thank you. Chanel from the Ronalds Way Met Office. There is a strong wind warning for the North RAC. State of sea is moderate or rough, becoming moderate overnight. Some rain this evening, clearing by midnight, then dry and clear in a fresh to strong west-southwesterly, down to 10 Celsius through the night. And for Friday, Jehenya dry with sunny intervals in a fresh to strong west-southwesterly, which will ease later up to 16 degrees. A pleasant afternoon, dry after dark overnight, minimum 12. And for Jasan, Saturday will dawn dry and bright, then cloudy and wet on a light southerly, backing southeasterly, becoming strong by Saturday evening. Daylight maximum 16 Celsius. Low water is in about 5 minutes' time. Sunset 3 minutes past 7. High tide 17 minutes to midnight. Low tide tomorrow morning 9 minutes past 6. And the sun rises at 16 minutes past 7.
Manx Glass and Glazing can supply and install single, double and triple glazing. Call 674 573 or visit the showroom on the Snugborough Trading Estate.
Maritime trade union Nautilus has labelled the attitude of the steam packet company as unacceptable. A dispute over conditions continues, which is being described as reaching an impasse. Senior national organiser Gary Elliott thinks the steam packet's just not being reasonable.
It's not that we're opposed to the living on board. We've just all along over the past 2 years said it should be a matter of choice. Because some of these employees, and a number of them being residents on the Isle of Man, have chosen to work for the Isle of Man steam packet so they can be at home with their families and children, and have worked for the company for in excess of 2 or 3 decades. So to actually just impose a change, for it to become non-negotiable with no arbitration, and to end employees with 20 years service, end their contracts at the end of December and reissue them with new contracts, which only discourteous employers would actually do elsewhere, we find unacceptable. You know, we had hoped to keep the consultation and discussion open on the issue at hand, which is the living on board. But unfortunately, the employer won't engage with arbitration, conciliation or mediation with the Manx Industrial Relations Service.
And if this is an impasse situation, that would effectively indicate a stalemate. So is there nothing either side could compromise on which would give any movement to the discussions?
I find it difficult, really. I mean, we heard of a reasonable employer that comes to the negotiating table under a collective bargaining agreement to say the changes are non-negotiable. With that sort of attitude and the view that they're imposing the changes and that they're prepared to end people's contracts of employment after 25 years service, dedicated service on the island, and at the stroke of a pen, they're just going to rip up their terms and conditions and their contract of employment. It's just unbelievable.
The committee responsible for scrutinising the Manx government's finances says the lack of publication of unaudited accounts means targeted scrutiny isn't possible. The Public Accounts Committee has published its annual report reflecting on its investigations over the last year. The story from Sian Cowper.
The PAC has considered a range of issues over the last 12 months, including the future of the Douglas Bay Horse Tramway, spending on the Liverpool landing stage and student awards. The report makes 2 recommendations for change, including a call for an unaudited summary of key financial information to be published no later than 6 months after the end of a financial year. It comes after the committee questioned why government hadn't published its unaudited accounts, also known as the Light Blue Book, since 2021, or the Orange Book featuring trust accounts and other third-party statements since 2017. Treasury Minister Alex Allinson told the committee compiling the Light Blue Book takes up considerable officer resource, but the PAC says targeted scrutiny without the publication or an equivalent is not possible. The second recommendation relates to government's decision to de-scope the horse trams on Douglas Prom. It was confirmed to the committee's vice chairperson that the decision to halt plans to continue the tramway to the sea terminal was a collective decision by the Council of Ministers, despite the project having received Tynwald approval in 2017. The committee says the decision not to seek Tynwald approval for this change reflects poorly on the Department of Infrastructure and the Council of Ministers. As a result, the PAC report includes a recommendation for Tynwald to back its calls for a vote to be required in advance of any deviation from previously approved scoping. The committee had been due to report back on its investigation into government's handling of the new Isle of Man ferry terminal in Liverpool in January, but was unable to meet the deadline. It says those findings will be released ahead of a debate at November's sitting of Tynwald. The committee's reports will be laid before Tynwald at the October sitting.
Update brought to you by Simcox Advocates, advising businesses and families since 1949. Visit simcox.com or call 690 300.
The Manx government's not doing enough to protect the Isle of Man steam railways, so says a supporters association which claims new housing developments, including those in Ballasalla and Castletown, go against the strategic plan. The document's currently being reviewed and a consultation asking for feedback closes at 5 o'clock tomorrow. Chair of the Isle of Man Steam Railway Supporters Association, Bill Cubban.
This is the blueprint for the island's planning going forward, probably the next 10-15 years. And so it's really important that people pay attention to this. It's one of those things that doesn't sound terribly exciting, but it is important because if you value the look of the Isle of Man and the attractive lifestyle that we have here, then it's important that you don't go and build a major development in the wrong place. I'm not saying we shouldn't be developing the island, but the railway has 282 houses built at Ballasalla over the last year or two, and that's quite a thing. The tourists are going to see that. You wouldn't have a modern housing estate built next to Laxey Wheel, for instance. Really, we've got to be careful that the development is spread round the island and you don't end up with the tourists seeing estate after estate as they travel along. I don't think the strategic plan has protected the railway enough, and it's one of the things where people need to get involved in this consultation that's going on. Well, of course, the government is also reviewing the railways at the current time as well, and that is a concern because we don't know which direction that's going in. The railways are really important to the tourist trade at the moment, and so it's important to look after your heritage heritage and look at the reasons why that was important then, because tourism and the spend that tourists make on the island is important today, and we really need to make sure we keep that.
Work has already begun on reforming how legal services are offered and delivered on the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man Law Society says it's also planning a full review of its governing bylaws with the intention of modernising internal rules and enhancing powers to improve consumer protection. Vice President of the Isle of Man Law Society, Peter Klukas.
It's something the Law Society has always supported. And to be honest, I don't think it is necessarily something that we're saying we fundamentally disagree with all the arguments against separation. It is impracticable for a size of the profession on the Isle of Man to effectively separate those roles. But I think what Lord Garnier is saying is that does not mean that the governance and the functions and powers of the Law Society should not be looked at. And that's something, again, which has been ongoing. The Code of Conduct, which is the expression that Lord Garnier uses in the Isle of Man, in fact, those regulations are called the Advocates' Practice Rules. But it is effectively the set of rules or regulations that govern the professional conduct of advocates. That is something that's a piece of work the Law Society has had ongoing for probably at least 2 years. That there are draft new conduct rules in place, which have been discussed with other external parties who have a role in setting those rules. We've not gone further than we have at the moment because we were waiting for Lord Garnier to issue his report so that those rules could effectively then be reviewed and revised as necessary to reflect any recommendations going forward coming out of his report.
Sea Watch with the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company.
Motor ship Ben McCree left Heysham at 25 to 3. She'll be into Douglas in the next 25 minutes or so onto the link span about 6:15, departing this evening at 8:15. Manxman heads to Heysham, getting there about midnight, and 2:15 departure from Lancashire back to Douglas at 6 tomorrow morning. The fast craft Manannan left Douglas at 11 minutes to 2. She's in Liverpool now on the link span. Will be departing this evening at 7:15, arriving back in Douglas at about 11:15. Tomorrow morning's departure, 8:45. Ben McCree heads to Heysham.
Follow the Steam Packet on Twitter for the latest sailing information.
A senior lecturer who's accused Manxcare of constructive dismissal was essentially seeking a secondment rather than a sabbatical, according to the chief exec of the healthcare body. The latest from Siobhan Fletcher.
Raymond Dengaya's Employment and Equality Tribunal against the health body continued today. He's claiming victimisation and racism and discrimination due to heritage and race. He lodged his complaint on the 12th of September last year. The former Port Erin resident asked questions of Theresa Cope via video link from his residence in New Zealand. Mr Dengaya's main grievance surrounds a sabbatical request, which he submitted in April last year, which was ultimately denied. He's arguing this led to constructive dismissal as it left him with no choice but to resign. Yesterday, he told the tribunal that he believes his request was rejected on racial grounds because a female colleague working in a different area had a similar request approved. Today, Mrs Cope told the tribunal that wasn't the case. She argued the policy on sabbaticals is not clear-cut and no one is entitled to have them automatically approved. Manxcare sees around a handful of them submitted every year. She said the needs of the organisation had to be taken into consideration when requests are made, and that Mr Dengaya's own needs would have to be balanced against the training needs of the programme. The tribunal heard Mr Dengaya has a specific set of skills and that his work is vital to facilitating a CBT training programme. The tribunal continues tomorrow and is expected to extend into next week following some delays in proceedings. You can find this story in full at manxradio.com.
Manx Radio Business Briefing.
At 16 minutes before 6, in corporate news, investment company Digital 9 Infrastructure tumbled as it scrapped its second quarter dividend after a tough first half, said it swung to a loss of 6.63p per share in the 6 months to 30th of June, compared with earnings of £3.43 a year earlier. Elsewhere, in China, Evergrande's chairman Hui Kan-yan has been put under police surveillance as the problems for the Chinese property giant mount. Evergrande said its shares remain suspended until until further notice. It's another low for the heavily indebted property giant, which defaulted in 2021, triggering China's current real estate market crisis. This past August, it filed for bankruptcy in the US in a bid to protect its American assets as it worked out a deal. In a statement today, it said that Mr. Hui's been subject to mandatory measures in accordance with the law due to suspicion of illegal crimes, without giving any further detail. Hui Ka-yan was once Asia's richest person, worth $36.2 billion in 2019, according to Forbes, but his wealth has plummeted since Evergrande's problems have grown. On the Isle of Man, Douglas-based law firm Simcox Advocates has appointed Kevin Walmsley as a probate manager in its private client team. Mr. Walmsley's had a 4-decade career working within the trust and estate planning industry, was a vice president at Barclays Trust Company, then Barclays Wealth, and latterly a director of Zedra Group. He's a member of the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners and past board member and chair of its Isle of Man branch. Simcox private client departments ranked top tier by the Legal 500 and band 1 by Chambers and Partners. Kevin Walmsley will work alongside Chief Exec and Head of Private Client Phil Games, as well as probate manager Laura Connolly and solicitor Alexandra Chambers.
The Stock Market Report. Brought to you by Ramsey Crookall.
UK and European stocks broke a 5-session losing streak. US stocks rose, looking to recover some losses after the Fed's higher for longer stance on interest rates. US oil futures jumped to their highest in more than a year, and gold plumbed a 6-month low. The numbers now reported by Ramsey Crookall. At the close in London, the FTSE 100 up just over 0.1% at 7,601. The DAX in Frankfurt up 0.7% at 15,323. Currently New York City, a short time ago, the Dow Jones Industrial up 0.5%, 33,730. The Nasdaq Tech Stocks Index up 0.8% at 13,200. And in Chicago, the S&P 500 up almost 0.75% at 4,305. In the exchange markets, the British pound sterling trading at $1 22.1 cents, €1 15.5 cents, and 23 South African rand 21.2 cents. In commodities, gold's down 0.5% at $1,864 per troy ounce, and a barrel of Brent crude down almost 0.6% at $93.83.
You've got an investment plan?
Yeah, Mike set it up.
But don't you need loads of money to do that?
Not this one. It's called Shearwater from Ramsey Crookall, and you pay in monthly as little as £100. So it's like saving regularly, really helping us invest in the future for a house, or the kids' education.
£100 a month? I could easily do that.
You should. The sooner you start, the better.
Invest in your future with as little as £100 a month. Shearwater from Ramsey Crookall, the island's investment specialist for 75 years. Call 717171 or visit ramseycrookall.com. Licensed and regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority.
The Isle of Man in 30 minutes. Update on Manx Radio with Andy Wint.
Fast Am a social media post by the Isle of Man Constabulary's road policing unit's been described by the Manx Force as unacceptable and has been referred to the police's professional standards department. The constabulary today says last night's post by the RPU doesn't represent the views of the constabulary and is apologising to those involved. Here's Sean Cowper.
The now deleted Facebook post from the RPU described a 999 call from 2 teenagers concerned while driving in last night's storm conditions as daft, adding, "We have plenty to do in weather like this without this unnecessary drama." After deleting the post, the police have now issued an apology and say they will be making direct contact with those involved. The statement goes on to say any member of the public who feels they are in danger or needs help should be encouraged to ask for help. The matter has now been referred for further investigation.
Manx Radio Sport.
Fast am I, Rob Pritchard.
Fast am I. Good evening. First tonight, the Isle of Man's darts team have fought valiantly once again today in Denmark during the latest day of the WDF World Cup in Esbjerg. Margaret Kelly and Janine Halsall, as well as Sophie Hicklin and Jess Corlett, were competing in the women's pairs competition earlier. Kelly and Halsall faced Martina Solowska and Katrina Nagyova in the round of 128. Having played well in spells, Kelly and Halsall went down to a 4-2 loss to their Slovakian opponents. Meanwhile, Hicklin and Corlett took a 4-3 win in their opening match and reached the round of 32 before losing out to Leanne Topper and Alana Waters-Evans of Wales 4-1. In cycling, Manx pro cyclist Matthew Bostock has enjoyed another strong day of racing in the latest phase of the Tour de Langkawi earlier today. Competing in stage 6 of the competition out in Malaysia, Bostock finished well inside the top 10 in 8th place come the finish. He was also the highest placed rider for his Bolton Equities Black Spoke team, with his teammate and previous stage winner George Jackson the closest behind in 17th. In water sports, the Isle of Man is set to take part in high calibre competition in the sport of surf kayaking this coming weekend. 4 Manx competitors will head to Wales for the 2023 British Surf Kayaking Championships, being held at Freshwater West in Pembrokeshire on Saturday and Sunday. The event sees Britain's best surf paddlers face off in longboat, shortboat and wave ski classes across a range of different age categories. And finally, in motorsport, TT Lap record holder Peter Hickman and the Isle of Man is set to feature in an upcoming episode of a podcast which aims to improve physical and mental health. Hickman will be the guest of Stompcast, which has been created by UK mental health ambassador Dr. Alex George and was filmed on Ireland in the last few days. Hickman says the episode will see him talk about some of the many things the great Isle of Man has to offer, as well as some of his background, mental health in sports and the Isle of Man TT races. The episode featuring Hickman and the Isle of Man is expected to be released early next month.
Manx Radio Travel, driven by Quayside Tyres and Service Centre.
Inbound at Ronalds Way, the Loganair 10-8 from London City's on time. The 5-8 Loganair from Liverpool, returning patient transfer plane on time. The 8 EasyJet from Manchester is delayed 35 minutes in at 20-9. The 25-9 EasyJet from Gatwick will be in at 9 o'clock tonight. Outbound 6 o'clock, Loganair to Liverpool on time. 25-9 EasyJet to Manchester delayed until 9:10, and the 9 o'clock EasyJet return to Gatwick delayed until 9:30. Remember, the Newcastle Town Road's closed between Spring Valley Roundabout and the bottom of Richmond Hill for resurfacing. Junction at the bottom of Richmond Hill's reopened. Traffic diverted along the Energy from Waste Access Road and the top of Quegg Hill. Temporary lights at Bullig Bridge and St John's still on, and the Ballagorn Road's closed near Ballabeg for ditching works. Hillside Avenue in Douglas closed through to Circular Road for adjacent office window replacement. Three-way lights at Victoria Road's junction with Governors and Glencrutchery Roads for resurfacing. That's on till the almost the end of October. Make plans. And Douglas Avenue by Tremode Road in Douglas is closed for gas repairs.
H&HMotorcycles.im for all your motorcycle requirements. Southgate Industrial Estate, opposite Quayside Tyres. Call 665646. Update. Brought to you by Simcox Advocates.
A Sulby man who instructed children in the Philippines to carry out sexual acts for him over the internet has been jailed. This report from Tessa Hawley contains information you may find distressing.
John Peter Eaton of Keller Road was described as appalling by the Deemster who sentenced him at Douglas Courthouse today. He'd previously denied inciting or procuring a child to commit gross indecency and 7 offences of creating still and moving indecent images of children. However, he changed his plea on the first day of his trial. His offending took place between February 2013 and October 2021. The court heard Eaton's wife had contacted police after logging on to her husband's computer to check the unemployed 33-year-old was searching for a job. When officers searched his devices, they found 2 video recordings made via Skype, which showed Eaton directing the 3 Filipino children to carry out sexual acts. 10 indecent images were also recovered. The court heard Eaton had made efforts to cover his tracks, including using an incognito web browser. He denied committing the offences, and the court was told he was planning to blame his wife for them. A victim impact statement written by her and read to the court by the prosecutor said she couldn't believe what she was looking at when she opened the device. Explaining how she'd suffered a breakdown as a result, she added, "I often wonder what happened to the children who he helped to abuse and hope that they are now safe." Praising Eaton's now ex-wife for reporting him to the police, Deemster Graham Cook told her she was very brave. Addressing Eaton in the dock, he told him, "You have brought embarrassment, devastation to your wife and relatives close to you. You are a coward, an absolute coward." Eaton was jailed for 26 months and placed on the sex offenders register and under a sexual offences prevention order for 10 years. years.
The Enterprise Minister says he's sorry to hear of the demise of Moore's traditional smokehouse in Peel, which has been smoking herring since 1882. Tim Johnston, MHK, says it's regrettable but reflects the nature of the sector, which historically has seen considerable churn. He acknowledges it coincides with the new dawn of the Isle of Man's herring fishery.
That's an interesting point, and I think post-Brexit here's a new opportunity for the island. So certainly DEFRA have been talking about that recently. I mean, I do believe the product that they were smoking obviously has been imported, quite large amounts. The scaling up of the herring fleet and the herring production, I'm not sure how long that would take. So yeah, there's obviously, I think it's a separate issue really to a certain extent, but of course very sorry to hear that that's happened. It's always disappointing when we get that movement, and I think we have to acknowledge that, especially in the hospitality sector, historically there's always been quite a lot of what I call churn in that sector. For the size of the population, we do have a lot of hospitality businesses, so we do see that happening. Obviously it's always disappointing. As a department, predominantly obviously we're involved with food export and support in that area, but clearly business development is something we do. Always very keen to talk to businesses. There's support available, free advice and consultation available for businesses, so we're always willing to talk and discuss with businesses. And if businesses are struggling, we do come and speak to us and see what we can do to discuss with you and see where we can help. We saw through COVID the government put a substantial amount of support, over £130 million into the economy, supporting many businesses, including a lot of businesses in hospitality that were really badly affected obviously by COVID. So the government has done that. Obviously that was in a point where the economy was closed. We're back into sort of normal trading conditions at the moment, and although it is challenging, the government doesn't put direct support into businesses in that way.
That's it for Update Tonight, compiled from the resources of Manx Radio's news department. Thanks to newsreader Chanel Suku, producer Rhiann Evans. After the news, we're in the archive with Judith Lay. Greatest Hits with Chris Kinley at 6:30. Morris Powell's Light Music at 9. Rhiann with The Late Show, and I'm back tomorrow, Friday at 5:30.
WINT